Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Sand Mbakanu. Good morning, Mr. Rama. Our mentees are joining the call. Thank you very much for being with us today. We'll be taking the topic traditional knowledge, geographical indication, and generic resource as it relates to intellectual property. And today is the week 5 of Jiipcc Mentorship and Internship Program. We are still awaiting our mentees to join the call. The attendance is very low, but while we're waiting, I'll be taking a few announcements and also reading our mentor's profile for today. Okay, that's our first mentor for today, Mr. Sand Mbakalu. Has over 15 years experience implementing international development programs in geographical indications, international trade and investment, trade policy research, policy reform, market access, monitoring and evaluation, capacity building, market linkage, and value chains. Sand's experience is cross-cutting in a complex cultural environment, applying multi-dimensional techniques and the entrepreneurial capability to deliver results. He is the lead technical consultant on African intellectual property and innovation project and the EU IPO funded and funded program supporting the Nigerian government to create enabling environment to protect and promote geographical indications in Nigeria. Sand is also leading the national research project funded by the France Development Agencies to identify potential geographical indications products in Nigeria. He is the current executive director of Africa International Trade and Commerce Research, an international trade firm for the African market. Over the year, Sand and his team have been working on promoting and creating awareness of GIs in Nigeria. Some of the programs and projects on GI that have been implemented include organizing the National Sustainable Development of Nigerian Geographical Indications, Stakeholders Engagement 2017, and the second edition of Nigerian Geographical Indication Stakeholders Dialogue 2018 team, making Nigerian GI global, including the most recent event that was jointly hosted, a webinar series with World Intellectual Property Organization on the importance of geographical indication on the sustainable development of Nigeria, and many others. Sand is a current PhD student with the University of Cape Town, South Africa. He holds a master's degree, business and management from the University of Portsmouth, UK, and bachelor degree in international trade from the University of Portsmouth, UK. Certificates in trade negotiation in an era of uncertainty from Europe University Institute, Italy, and many other professional capacity development certificates from WTO, UNCAD, and many other reputable institutions. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are so happy to have Mr. San Carlo Mba as our mentor today, and he'll be talking to us on geographical indications, traditional knowledge, and generic resource. Thank you very much. Kindly join me welcoming our mentor today. You can just send a message of welcoming him on the chat box. Our second mentor for today is Mrs. Liz Lenjo. Lizenjo is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, Commissioner for Oaths and Notary Policy. Lizenjo is the founder and managing consultant of My IP Legal Studio. She specializes in intellectual property, entertainment, media, and fashion law. She is an immediate former member of the Copyright Tribunal, the tribunal established under Section 48 of the Copyright Act. She serves in the Kenyan Fashion Council as the head of intellectual property and Policy in the Legal Committee. She is an adjunct faculty member at the Strathmore University Law School, where she teaches sports law, media and entertainment law, as well as business law. This is also a tutor with Copyright X by Harvard X Kenya that is run by the Go Down artist. Please, someone's mic is unmuted. Kindly mute yourself. Thank you. Liz holds a master's degree of law, LLM, in intellectual property law from the University of Turin, Italy, and World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. A bachelor's degree of law, LLB, from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, CUAEA, and postgraduate diploma, Kenya School of Law. She also holds a certificate in fashion law from Fashion Law Institute, Fordham University Law School, New York. She also has a professional certificate in IP management, mediation and arbitration from WIPO Academy and Copyright X from Harvard X. Liz is also a published writer and scholar. Her LLM research paper has been published by the renowned Marquette Intellectual Property Law Review 2018, titled Inspiration versus Exploitation, Traditional Cultural Expression at the Helm of the Fashion Industry. The paper is available online on Westlaw and Nexus, as well as the Marquette IP Law Review website. She has also written and been quoted in several local newspapers, including the Sunday Nation, the Standard, the Star Up magazine, now the Funch, Copyright News, among others, as well as international news platform. This is focusing on non-legal minds to understand basic issues in these areas of law. She is also the chapter lead of Creative Commons Kenya and the head of the cultural and entertainment platform. This has been recognized for her efforts in legal fields and is a recipient of the prestigious nomination in Kenya. Business Daily Top 40 and Top 40 Under 40 Women 2018. Thank you very much for joining us today, Ms. Louise Danger. Our very profound mentor, Professor S. Ramarao, is also with us on the call today. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. Professor Ramarao serves as the director of WIPO Coordination Office in New York. He has been WIPO's representative till the beginning of 2014 at the UN headquarters in New York. Currently, he is holding the GNLU Microsoft chair. Professor Rao worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India for nearly 25 years and became its chief legal advisor. He was also the legal advisor at the Permanent Mission of India to the United Nations in New York from 1995 to 1998. Earlier, he was a full-time professor at the Advanced Legal Studies Department of the University of Madras from 1977 to 1982 and lectured at several universities in USA. He was an adjunct professor in the Columbia University and PACE University Law School, New York. He was also a visiting faculty member at the Indian Academy for Diplomacy and International Law, Indian Foreign Service Institute, executive members of the Indian Society of International Law, member of SAARC Arbitration Council, member of the editorial board of Indian Journal of International Law, and the Indian Yearbook of International Affairs, and an active member of the International Law Association in India branch. He is enrolled as a member of the bar at Delhi High Court and has several publications. He has been the director of Intellectual Property and Technology Board globally. Thank you very much for taking out time to be with us today, Professor Ramarao, and we look forward to learning from your vast experience and the topic. Our final mentor for today, Mr. Samuel Abu, is an ambitious and astute lawyer with a detailed-oriented approach to solving legal issues. He is an associate of Doyle Ovia and Alex Adedipe, a boutique commercial law firm where he worked primarily with the TMT, Technology, Media and Telecommunications, and IP Intellectual Property departments of the firm. He is adept at providing advisory service to the clients regarding their various transactions, objectives, and business undertakings. In the course of his practice, he has reviewed and advised on IP implications, on creative contracts, and equally advised on IP protection strategy for startups, such as trademark and copyright protection. He has been involved and practices in a wide range of areas, including corporate and business advisory, intellectual property advisory, telecommunications, media and technology, and private equity. He is actively contributing to IP education and awareness in Nigeria through collaborative podcast sessions, social media and speaking engagements. He is a lawyer of arts, and in his spare time, you find him listening to music, reminiscing, an art gallery visit, or writing fictions. Those are 4 mentors for today. Thank you very much for being with us today. Jiipcc, appreciate you coming here to mentor us today, and all our mentors also appreciate you. I'll be giving the floor to our first mentor to give us a talk. I believe you can hear me, Professor Rama Rao. Yes, sir. It's over to you now. Thank you very much, sir.
So, should we go ahead now?
Yes, sir. You can go ahead now. I think the time limit is 30 minutes, so I don't know if you can work with the time.
Say that again.
I think you have 30 minutes. 30 minutes.
20?
No, 30.
13.
30, like 30 minutes.
You mean half hour?
Yes, yes, sir.
Oh, I thought you said 10 minutes in the beginning in the...
No, sir.
Oh, I'll see, because I was prepared for 10 minutes mentally. Because that is what that was written in the request. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon to you there, to the convener, the other colleagues who are mentors, very distinguished people, and all the mentees. First of all, I would also like to place on record my appreciation, congratulations and thanks to the founder of this organization, Jiipcc, which is Madam Juliana Imam. My congratulations to her. And thank you for convening this, my friend, this afternoon there for you. I am supposed to speak on traditional knowledge. I think that is the topic given to me. Now, can you people tell me whether I am audible, visible? Yeah?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Okay. All right. Now, what I plan to do would be a brief, I don't have any written points. I have lots of notes here, but nothing written on for this. But on traditional knowledge, I would like to say the issues, the evolution, the stages, and the trends, and what's happening today in the Can I go ahead?
Yes, sir. You can go ahead, sir.
Yeah, because there's some talk in between. Okay. So I was saying, what is the scope of my current presentation today? Which is essentially to know the topic, then the different stages of the evolution, including different trends on the basic issues, and where we are today. And it's anybody's guess what's going to happen later. Now, everyone knows about traditional knowledge. You don't have to be like, if I didn't know intellectual property, it's possible I didn't know. But if it is traditional knowledge, everyone, whether you are an intellectual property person or not, you would know it. But by the way, tell me, we are dealing only with the traditional knowledge, not with the traditional cultural expressions, right?
So we are dealing with the topic for today is the generic resource, traditional knowledge, and cultural expression.
Oh, and cultural expressions. Okay. Now, so the scope expands. Okay. Now let's start from there. In the field of, because we are all from the field of intellectual property, traditional knowledge, as I said, everyone knows about traditional knowledge. And traditional cultural expressions refers to something like anything that we express from out of our culture, to songs, music, dance, whatever, anything that reflects our culture, any form of expression. Now that is traditional cultural expressions. Traditional knowledge includes that and more. It could refer to, say, the medicinal knowledge, which the ancient communities always had. It didn't have to be cutting-edge science, but in the past, like hundreds and thousands of years ago, in villages and communities, they always had their own medicines. They might not be, as scientific as they are today, but that's what they are. They were. So that refers to, I just gave traditional medicine, but we can give several examples, like even growing the plants or all kinds of things that you can imagine. And that knowledge, in a larger sense, could also be the cultural knowledge and the expression of their culture. But then later, that expression of culture has become more sophisticated into a separate branch called traditional cultural expressions, or now called TCEs, but originally called folklore, which basically refers to our community dances, our, all over the world, dances, good old days before the modern capitalism and scientific world has come in. Like for good or bad, a baby is born, there is some dance, there's some celebration. There's something sad happened, but there's some dance or some celebration. There is some drink for that. And all that could be traditional knowledge, cultural expressions. In a vague sense, that is what it was. And then, in the field of intellectual property, running quickly through the stages, in the field of intellectual property, when the precursor to WIPO, OMPI, there was Burpee, and then afterwards, the developing countries in 1960, all the colonies became, thanks to the UN Declaration on Colonialism, became independent countries. before that only few. And this all led to the thinking in Burpee that to get them into the fold of intellectual property global regime. And that is how the plan for establishment of a new name for this organization called WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, started. With that, these countries also brought with them and their own communities and the knowledge of their communities, and that became the traditional knowledge and cultural expressions. So the Stockholm Conference of 1967, for the first time, which was also planning to turn into WIPO, WIPO, from Burpee, the French acronym of the World Intellectual Property, which has been there from 1893 or so, has now become a topic. So 1967, at the Stockholm Conference, which was an institutional conference, there was also the talk about the traditional cultural expressions or folklore at that time. This led up to, in 70s, the Tunisian model clauses. And those days, copyright was a division in UNESCO, UNESCO, Education and Scientific Cultural Organization based in Paris. So UNESCO and WIPO by 1982 in collaboration, because WIPO came into existence in 1970 and it became a UN organization in 1974, a specialized agency, as the sole specialized organization in the United Nations system for intellectual property. That's what WIPO was since 1974 as a specialized agency. So WIPO and UNESCO worked together and produced in 1982 model clauses on expressions of folklore. That's the beginning of the evolution of law at the global level. There was also the Tunisian model clauses, as I said before. And then the model clauses were not generally considered at that time on traditional cultural expressions as satisfactory enough. So WIPO was further working on that, particularly the Copyright Standing Committee. And then 1987, further discussion with UNESCO. So WIPO launched in this evolution process 2-3 other stages. Number one, conducted studies globally on, this time the traditional knowledge item also is mixed, on number one, in terms of traditional cultural expressions, like what are they? And how is it happening? Say in Asia, from Indonesia to Philippines to Malaysia to India onwards, and then the whole of Africa. Then go to Tunisia because of the model clauses on that. And then my friends, for the first time, we have a broader outlook of the kind of situations that are there at this stage in terms of the studies on traditional knowledge and cultural expressions, like rosy periwinkle from Madagascar, like Hudai cactus from Southern Africa, and of course, South Africa later, and Ayahuasca, or the traditional cultural expressions, the Trinidadian steel drums, or the reggae music of Jamaica, or just name it, or the turmeric of Indonesia, Thailand, India, or the batik paintings of Indonesia, and then the old leather puppet shows from India and Indonesia in the classical mythology, or the molas from Panama, just name it, or then the whole lot of great treasure of traditional knowledge in Africa, like from Ghana to Cameroon to down, I mean, the whole of Africa, North Africa and down all over. Now, all these examples and million more that you guys might know have presented problems of TCEs, expressions of folklore, and that of traditional knowledge, the turmeric neem on which the patents were given in Europe and United States, or on basmati rice, patents were given in United States. There was a problem at that time in 1990s onwards with the USPTO, with the EPO, European Patent Office, and like say, for instance, in this case, the Indians contesting them, saying that, look, you are getting patents for this, and what are you getting patents? What are the fundamentals of patents? There's got to be an inventive step, got to be invention, and there should be utility, the three ingredients of non-obviousness. And now these were known in India thousands of years ago, and they were written in the Sanskrit scripts. Then these people asked, what are they? Where are they? We don't know. Two aspects from the Western side. Number one, if it has been, first, there is no evidence. There is no intellectual property database in USPTO, in EPO, or in PCT in WIPO, or EPO anywhere, or in any country, or in India, or in Nigeria, or anywhere for that matter. There's no database. Without database, how would you cross-check the patent is obvious or non-obvious, or whether it's inventive or non-inventive, whether it's utilitarian or non-utilitarian? How do you cross-check? So what is there to stop us from issuing patents, granting patents for these areas? Then there is an answer to it. Now, same about traditional cultural expressions, which is, if we think that traditional knowledge is closely related to patents, traditional cultural expressions is related to copyright. Now, that's picked, as I said, that has been picked up globally before the TCEs, or expressions of folklore, were picked up at the global level, even before the TK was. Here, also, we have, of course, on the copyrights, the debate between United States and the rest, even before this started. But here, the fundamental of copyright is originality and expression. Without expression, an absolute idea itself is not copyrightable. Okay? That abstract idea, not absolute, abstract idea needs to be expressed in a manner, whether visible, audible, whatever. Nowadays, of course, even taste can also have all this. In terms of McDonald's and all that. Of course, there's also a trademark issue. So now, two issues we have here. One is, if it's already in the public domain, then you cannot stop it. No traditional knowledge owner, community, country has a right to stop it because it's already in the public domain. The counter argument is, if it's already in the public domain, you cannot patent it. Because the whole concept of patents is, depending upon the duration, now under, of course, under TRIPS it is 20 years. After the passing of the 20 years, it falls into public domain. Once it falls into public domain, anybody can use it and do anything he wants to do, including further innovation, and then maybe later patenting. Now, just to give you an example, this whole rubric of the duration falling into public domain is a big deal in the pharmaceutical industry, even today. With a lot of clinical trials, say even for traditional knowledge, such as neem or whatever, you take any genetic resource, you take any tree plantation or whatever that is used or the germplasm that's used for those purposes. Take them all into consideration and then produce, after a lot of research and a lot of clinical trials, a drug. And that is patented as satisfying the basic conditions of the patent. Then it lasts for 20 years. After 20 years, after the filing of the application for 20 years, that of course is a big argument in the pharmaceutical industry, whether 20 years is really 20 years or the actual working period of a drug is only 10, 12 years. So they're investing billions into it. So how do they get it back? And that is, of course, then there is the question of the evergreening of medicines. Now, but once it is out, the pharma, which is the manufacturing pharmaceutical industry, finishes the 20 years, then it falls into public domain. Then the generic industry, the generic pharmaceutical industry, which is of course the biggest in India, would pick it up and produce that and distribute it globally, including in the United States, where it was originally made. So that is the public domain thing, which is also helping the developing countries. But then what is in public domain cannot be patented. What is in public domain cannot be prevented, saying it is patented by others. Anyway, let me stop that at that stage. Now we have studies conducted. WIPO conducted the studies, and WIPO did the fact-finding missions on the basis of the studies. And two basic studies was, number one was with reference to the traditional cultural expressions, and number two is with reference to the traditional knowledge. The second one, traditional knowledge issue, was also done by WIPO in collaboration with UNEP, the study-wise. Okay. By then, my friends, in between, in 1992, there was the Rio conference, the first Rio conference on environment. And that is where, for the first time, there was a convention on something related to traditional knowledge for us. And as the topic goes, genetic resources, there is a convention related for the first time with reference to traditional knowledge and genetic resources, that is called the Convention on Biodiversity, CBD. CBD was a product. Is there, tell me the time limit, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. So you have 5 more minutes to go. So
oh
you
my
can...
God, I just started.
I'm sorry, sir.
Oh my God, okay. Oh boy, I was going in a story.
So I think after our second mentor's talk, you can still jump in again, because we are expecting 4 mentors, but we only have 2 mentors. So our mentors will have enough time, but I think you will also be giving the floor to the second mentor to give us his own overview on the topic. Then when the mentees, after the mentees presentation, you can come and contribute and give the final
I should finish
talk.
now. My God, I'm only in introduction. I'm so sorry, my friend. Okay, let me now move forward. So now we move forward, and we have the Intergovernmental Committee of WIPO established in 2000. Now we are in 2023. We have the IGC of WIPO convened so far 47 sessions of the Intergovernmental Committee on traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions. Now the last one, in 2000-2001, they decided to call for a diplomatic conference on intellectual property, genetic resources, and traditional knowledge. And that conference is going to be done before 2024. And this is a diplomatic conference. I can explain to you because I participated in diplomatic conferences, such as the establishment of the Rome Statute on International Criminal Court in late 90s. Anyway, so we'll come to that. That is one big thing. And another big thing is that the IGC is also, and there is a text now out of all the different theories and different group positions. including that Africa and developing countries and others on basically covering domain, public domain, and the issue of disclosure of the origin of traditional knowledge or genetic resources, which is a fundamental substantive issue in this whole debate. There is now a small text prepared by the chairman of the Intergovernmental Committee of WIPO, which is mandated by the General Assembly of WIPO to go in for a diplomatic conference. Now, recently, there's the IGC finished and regional consultations are taking place. In Africa, of course, there was one in Algeria. I think all over they've been meeting. And now the Intergovernmental Committee's next session is going to be next month, exactly 1 month, from 4th September. That is called the special session taking place in Geneva. And there is going to be from 4 to 11, along with the special session, there is going to be the preparatory conference for the diplomatic conference. The preparatory committee for the diplomatic conference taking place within 1 month. We are at a crucial time, and this will disclose the draft. I'll just take only 1 minute. The draft put up by the chairman of this, the lady, chairwoman, is going to deal with the objectives, the preamble, the disclosure of origin of genetic resources and traditional knowledge, and the genetic resources, the disclosure, and then any databases called the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library, which was first produced by WIPO, India in WIPO, and then other areas of reservations and retroactivity and dispute settlement. And this is the top of the line, this instrument. And I thank you. I'm so sorry because I didn't have, I wish you told me before. I stop here and I'll come for questions.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Rama. Thank you very much for the very detailed introduction, detailed history, and overview on the topic for today. I'll be giving the floor to our second mentor on the call, Mr. Sand Mbakalu. He also have 30 minutes to give us a very extensive overview on the topic for today. Mr. Sand, are you on the call?
Okay, yes. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so thank you very much, Prof, for Professor Rama for the update. Well, if I turn my video on, I wonder if I'll be able to have enough bandwidth to be able to sustain it. Because I'm in a public place and I'm also using a public Wi-Fi. So let's see how far it will take me. So let me jump in quickly into this. I was giving a series of topics. I wasn't sure if you want to handle, if it was I also speak on the 3 topics, because the last time the 3 questions that were given, I was allowed to speak on them after the mentees have made their presentation. So just also to let everyone know, should you hear noise at the background, I'm on transit on international flight, so you might hear some noise at the background. Just ignore it and just concentrate on what I'm saying. Professor Rama has given us a background on the international dimension and how nations have managed their international knowledge. One of the questions that I was asked is that who enjoys economic rights of traditional knowledge? It is really simple in the sense that it should be the people that own the right, but it's also the other way around. It's also complex because some traditional knowledge are prohibited from the traditional people to benefit from it economically, because the law of the community or the countries does not allow them. So while I make my presentation, I'll give a lot of examples using Nigeria as a case study. But we are members of WIPO, and WIPO and even the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People give this right that the traditional knowledge belongs to the people. They should benefit from it. But you remember that as Nigerians, and there are medications that we use called like agbo, because it doesn't have scientific proof of the cure of this medicine. So most times, even NAFDAC themselves, which is the regulatory authority, discourage people from using it. So let me take it this way. I've been detailed to speak on traditional knowledge, the economic benefit, the implication for expiration of intellectual property, in terms of the enforcement, and as well as geographical indication, which is most times the area that I'm really passionate about. So I will take it sequentially, using, first of all, speaking on who benefits from traditional knowledge. Traditional knowledge under the human rights right for indigenous people is the people that owns it. That traditional knowledge has to do with traditional way of farming, art and craft, the way that we have always done things as Africans, the way we have always done things as people. And bearing in mind that traditional knowledge is not just about Africa, it's also, just as Professor Arama has also mentioned, about traditional way of doing things in India, how they can move on to apply it in other regions. But the challenge with when we contextualize this in intelligence with Nigeria is the laws in Nigeria does not really recognize some traditional way of doing things, which means that if the law does not recognize it, it makes it a little bit illegal and it makes it unsustainable. But some African countries have recognized the importance of protecting the traditional knowledge, and they put in laws in place. For example, I am in South Africa now. The South African government over the years have come to recognize the power of traditional knowledge. That is why when you look at in South Africa, there are places you go to, they only speak their local dialects, not minding that you can even understand English. And as well as the traditional way of them healing themselves, and the community have appreciated it, and the law has accommodated it. For example, the herbal remedies, the handcraft, the way they dance, the way they sing, the way they use to settle disputes in the traditional setting, the law has recognized it. But in other African countries, the law has not recognized. So the community cannot really benefit. Why community benefit from others? And what WIPO has done over the years is to be able to encourage people to be able to benefit from this their traditional knowledge. So in a way, traditional knowledge is not an individual benefit, but like trademark. That is the difference. It's most times the community that owns that right. Now, the downside from traditional knowledge is that because it's handed down to oral, every family has a way they handle things. So when you pass message, when you pass message or knowledge down generation, from generation to generation, it loses its potency. What we advocate is in terms of traditional knowledge. And if you look at in Nigerian context, the copyright means the folklore appreciates some of these things and it has been put in the law, but it doesn't recognize everything. So what we say is, when we advocate that when the law is put in place to protect traditional knowledge, there should be a way where this thing is written and is reviewed periodically to be able to accommodate differences that happens, and as well as harmonized standard. This has always, harmonization of standard has always been a challenge, even across, even when WIPO was supposed to consider traditional as a part of the intellectual party. People have always said, what is the standard you're going to use to gauge this? And as an upcoming IP practitioners, you should also see this as a way of how do you ensure, for example, handcrafting to be consistent. If you look at Ashoke, which is southwest Nigeria way of putting in the textile, what is the standard way of ensuring that Ashoke meets some quality, or tie and dye? What is the quantity you have to put in? But you realize that families in this region have always had their own unique way. We call it rational knowledge, but that unique way might be different from other things. And also there are also processes called harmful practices. For example, which most times some tradition we say is our culture. I'm going to now circumcision of female child. It is harmful practice because in some tradition says it is their way of doing things. So, and it's illegal by law because they call it harmful practice. But generations will say it is the way of doing things and it has always been better for us. But if you look at it, is that cultural heritage, preserving it, good for humanity? So when you have law that refuse it periodically, there's also this issue of speaking to the people in this area to be able to understand why it is harmful, why it is not supposed to be accepted, and why the law, even why it criminalizes it, also ensure that there's also that area of advocacy of ensuring that people do away with it. There's also traditional knowledge in the area of how people farm. Is this way of farming, has it helped people over the years to be able to increase productivity? In most cases, no, because new ideas have come, new ways of doing things. For example, burning farmland and planting after 7 years or after 2 years, it kills the ecosystem. These are traditional practices that even when we say it should be maintained, it is not ideal and sustainable in the long run. So, however, the economic benefit is to the people, but is it really getting them economically? Is it really benefiting them economically? As IP practitioners, we should look at this and reconsider so many things, even why our law in totality does not recognize it, but how, even if we advocate that our law should recognize what and what should come. Now, I want to speak on a little bit on how the challenging part of expiration of intellectual property and how it can be resolved. So, and because this is a question I was asked to work on. In thinking about this and also doing some research about it, I realized that one of the challenges Africans have in terms of ensuring that intellectual property rights issues when it expires or it expires.
I don't know if you can hear Mr. Sad's audio. I can't hear him. Is it the same for everyone else?
Yes, I think it's the same.
Yes,
Okay,
I can hear him too.
he mentioned earlier that he's on transit, so sometimes his network can be off. So while we are waiting for him, I recognize the presence of our mentor, Miss Liz Lenjo is on the call. Welcome, Miss Lenjo. And we already, I believe when you joined the call, we've already started the topic for today. Our both mentors have given us their input. I think Mr. Sand is back, so we'll allow him to finish up before we call on Ms. Lenjo. Thank you very much, Ma, for joining us. Mr. Sand, I don't know if you can talk now. We lost you for a while. Mr. Sand's audio is unmuted, but I think he's talking. But we can't hear him. Okay, we can hear you now, sir.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about this.
No problem, sir.
Okay, so I've turned the camera up. Maybe that will help with the stop. So I'm going to make it quick, and so that I'm going to drive home my point, and then I can then, if there is enough time, I can then entertain questions. So there are issues the challenges, especially in the Nigerian context, when intellectual property issue expire duration, they have a lifespan, but when it expires, and as well as the challenge of women enforcing intellectual property rights, the capacity of those in the in the registry office or in the intellectual property office are not adequate to be able to address issue of intellectual property infringement. Two, experts in intellectual property related issue are not really there. Those that have the expertise are overwhelmed with responsibility. So they cannot really handle issues of infringement when it comes to them. And our legal system, most of the judges also, which is something that I've heard people say over and over again, does not have the capacity, and there's a call for a need to establish a special court on intellectual property, which has not still seen the light of the day. Even when WIPO supported the country, Nigeria, last year to be able to put together an intellectual property policy, that has also not seen the light of the day because of government bureaucracy, which is also the challenge in enforcing intellectual property infringement. And it is very expensive when you want to register, because an average year of, for example, to register a trademark takes longer. And I don't know why. And when we say these things, the registrar will tell you we'll resolve it. Well, we still go back to the same issue of how do you accelerate registration of something as simple as file registration of something as simple as a trademark. Not talk more of patent and design, which has a different level of assessment and technicality. It is still a big issue. Setting up a system in place where things are automated, like every other nation, is still a big issue. So I don't know what the country will do to address this. Even though we now have a new administration, we believe that if the new minister is appointed, Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, this is one of the areas they have to look at to see how the entire system of intellectual property, from registration to enforcement to verifying, have to be automated. And the capacity of those working in registry now has to be upgraded. And this can be upgraded, if the capacity has to be upgraded, and target has to be given to them, where if they don't meet up that target, there should be consequence. Maybe that will make them sit up, and there should be transparency as well as the area of enforcement and infringement. Lack of awareness is always a big issue. Some people use other people's intellectual property, not being aware of that they are infringing other people's rights. So, you can everyone will agree with me in this call that it has you've not, if you've heard, and I doubt if you've heard an advert or publicity in the radio that, oh, this are the education, this is what intellectual property is, and this is what it is when you infringe on someone's right. For example, copying someone's music and producing it without the person giving you consent, using someone's right in terms of their logo without their approval, taking pictures. And there is a case, a lady won with Sun newspaper, Nigeria Sun newspaper, I think it was like 3 months ago, where they used her picture without her consent. And this took her almost 3 years to get justice. You can imagine a small business having his or her trademark, or a small business trademark being infringed upon, taking 3 years. They don't have that luxury of time. This lady has the time and resources to be able to follow the legal process. So creating awareness of people infringing of other people's rights is important. And that is not something that has been done. And the only people that can push for this publicity and creating awareness are the government, not the private individuals, not the lawyers. So I've talked about, there's also the part of piracy. People copying other people's intellectual property rights and singing their music, recording it without recourse to them. And it's also a challenge because when you do that, how many people do you want to follow? You see people singing people's music across the radio station and everything. As to be legal IP practitioners, what do you think innovative way that can be done to be able to ensure this is addressed? And in the context of Nigeria, how can this be applied even from the legal point of view? Because even when you enforce issues, the only people that can enforce matters of this nature, not really the registry, is the police. But I do have a special unit, and the special unit in police force equipped enough to be able to follow up this to a logical conclusion. And with our Copyright Act, Trademark Act, Patent and Design Act, is it up to date to enforce compliance? I doubt it, because we are still dealing with something, even while copyright is in a way moving fast in terms of reform. I think we recently have the last regime, Buhari administration passed a copyright bill, but it will also take some time for the implementation, because when you pass bill, there's also regulation part that will ensure the bill has its teeth to be able to, for the application, for it to be enforceable. How long will it take? Because most times it has been shown that when a bill is passed, the enforcement or regulatory part takes longer time for the draft or the content of the regulation to be put in place. So now I am now going to talk on the aspect of geographical indication. Basically, the definition of geographical indication is about a product or goods that originate from a specific geographical area and that derive its characteristic and uniqueness based on the characteristic that is tied to a geographical area. Currently, we don't have a dedicated law that protects geographical indication in Nigeria. But what we have, according to the Trademark Act, is the certification mark. But that certification mark also has its limits, because it does not allow the registration of anything that has to do with, that has its name connected to a geographical area. For example, while we talk about Ijebu Gari or Ofada rice, these are names tied to a local community. When it comes to registration, even under certification mark, it will not allow you to register that name, because the name of a place is not allowed under the trademark law. And this is why we are saying that advocacy for having a sui generis system that will recognize geographical indication in our law has to be accepted. Even if you reform the trademark law and put it in, it doesn't have it do not still have the capacity to appreciate the nuances that come with geographical indication. For example, geographical indication recognize flavor, recognize smell as one of the characteristics in making a product unique. So if you want to say a trademark system will recognize smell, how is it going to assess it? So it's the only way to assess this and to accept it is through a sui generis system. But for the question, it talked about protection of traditional knowledge and geographical indication, the specific law. Nigerian Trademark Act protects expression of folklore, which is an aspect or element or traditional knowledge. But it does not still provide a comprehensive protection for traditional knowledge itself. Because when you talk about folklore or traditional knowledge, copyright will not protect traditional knowledge in medicine, in herbal. So that alone, it will always protect it on the terms of expression, in terms of our music, dance. But even in dance, it does not protect the dancing style. For example, the Gbira way of dancing. Copyright Act will not protect it. And even if we do whatever we do, it still ends up having, we still end up advocating for a sui generis system to be able to understand these steps, how many steps does it take, and how even our masquerade for it to be protected. But we are making headway, but it's not good enough. Even why we understand why most of our government institutions currently will not want to sit down to do the hard work, because the capacity of the people currently working in all the government institutions that handle intellectual property. By the way, we should also appreciate one fact, that anything intellectual property is controlled by the federal government. It's on an exclusive right. The state does not have a right to it. So now that brings to the question, who owns, where does intellectual traditional knowledge reside? Where does geographical indication reside? It resides in the local government, in the traditional community. But now the federal government has jurisdiction over intellectual property. You see now where the conflict comes, where there are certain things we have to review as a country. And this is not how it's applicable in other countries. Like in South Africa, the community owns it. The traditional institution owns this right. But in Nigeria, that is not it. So intellectual property has to be reviewed in the totality to appreciate the uniqueness and the robustness of protecting traditional knowledge and geographical indication as an aspect of intellectual property right. Because for the interest of the indigenous community to be respected and preserved, we must keep in mind the legal landscape that has to be reviewed to accommodate and moving it away. What I'm advocating now is that we move away the protection of intellectual property from the exclusive lead from the federal and allow the states to manage it. Why? When it comes to application of intellectual property rights at the international fora, the Federal Ministry of Industry and Investment under the Commercial Law Department will handle this issue. But when it comes to domestically, states should handle, so that I'm advocating now that there should be an intellectual property system for states, where if we want to really harness the benefits, I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yes, sir, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. You have 5 more minutes, sir.
Okay. So I will just round up with just some few points. If you want to harness the benefit of traditional knowledge, geographical indication, we have to do an overall rescoping of our intellectual property system. And having the art as it is now of what we have is not sufficient enough. A sui generic system, that means a law of its kind, is what I'm advocating for. 2, awareness should be created. More awareness, simplify the issue of traditional knowledge, geographical indication in our local context for people to appreciate it. 3, what is it and what can we consider as infringement has to be made clear for people infringing upon it, to be able to know that they're breaking the law, and for them to know that there's consequence if they break the law has to be promoted. Thirdly, the enforcement part of it, more expert has to be recruited into the Ministry of Intellectual Property, from the registry to the copyright system has to be enforced. And one other thing that I've never mentioned is also an aspect of our international obligations. Professor Rama made mention of a number of protocols that have been addressed from WIPO perspective. But most of these international protocols, even when Nigeria is a signatory to them, it has not been domesticated, or it has not been ratified, not talk more of even domestication. So, and this has always been talked about over and over again. And up to this moment, we are still in the same circle of nothing being done about it. And we are still advocating now that that has to be put in the front burner, especially with this new administration. And finally, for the entirety of this, because today is about traditional knowledge and geographical indication, we must understand that if we don't protect our traditional knowledge and geographical indication, as important as it is, our traditional knowledge and that our cultural expression will be extinct, because people will not see the need to be able to invest to protect it. People will not see the need to maintain that traditional line of practice, the good ones, I mean, because there is no robust protection for it. And that is where I will end at this point, while I listen to the mentees make their presentation and make further intervention if need be. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Sand. And thank you very much to our previous mentor, Professor Rama. We have our next mentor on the call. I will be giving her the floor to also give us a brief introduction to the topic before we take our mentee's presentation. Ms. Lenjo, over to you now, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. My apologies for being late. Something came up that I couldn't avoid. And at the moment, just give me a few minutes, I'll be able to put on my camera. I just left the airport. I had a meeting that took a little longer, so I had to connect the flight back home from Nairobi. So I'll put on my video in a bit. But as we talk about traditional knowledge, cultural expression, genetic sources, and geographical indications, I think a lot of what we want to address have already been addressed. So what I'll do is try and add a bit of more perspective in terms of, one, the Kenyan example. We have a Traditional Knowledge Act. And then secondly, in terms of the research and the countries that I've interacted with so far regarding TK and TCEs especially, and where the challenges are, opportunities that are there for budding intellectual property lawyers. So first and foremost, we've had the discussions, and we know that as far as TK is concerned, we know that the economic rights best with the community. And I think this is a very strong statement, but at the same time can kind of leave a lot of African states and communities in a bit of a confusion because primarily of the issue of documentation. Most of our communities have been practicing the TKs and the TCEs, but you find that there's been an issue in terms of documentation, in terms of who owns what becomes the biggest question. And even now, as we talk about compensating communities, we talk about communities taking ownership and leadership, then it leads back to the question of what do you own? And one of the challenges, like for us in Kenya, we are having in a country of about 47 tribes, counted tribes, and there are a few others that are supposedly not in the list of the 47. The issue of, have they taken the time to even realize that they have these assets in the form of TK and TCE? Most of them do not know. They never thought that they have rights. So already that is a big issue. And then going back to also how TK and TCEs have been passed on, especially traditional knowledge, it has always been handed down generation to generation. So you find that it's been more of like verbal, verbal sort of handover, right? A grandfather passes it on to a grandson or son, and that documentation process has almost been non-existent. And why documentation is really important is when you look at just the history of Africa and how we interacted before colonization with each other in the different regions across Africa. You see, you'll investigate and see that there was a lot of cultural exchange, right? In such a way that we need to sit down as from a community level up to the continental level to sit down and identify which community owns what similarities are there, and what cultures are the same, and then how do we sort of perhaps even share the pie, right? In my research, we reviewed that there was a lot of similarities with the what we call the Bantu languages in Kenya, with some of the South African communities like the Xhosa and the Zulu. And the conversation has been, what? So if someone who has been really keen was to investigate and they realize that a certain traditional knowledge or cultural expression was awarded to the Zulu community, that they made some monetary realization or profit to the detriment of another community that has the same culture or the same knowledge, then how do you handle that? So already you can see that as far as IP lawyers are concerned, that is an opportunity where they can lead their communities to be able to document their TKs, their TCEs. And again, in the process of the TK documentation of TK and TCEs, you will find that now all these other IP regimes would start checking in. So, for example, if we're going to record a dance, then the issue of an audiovisual work is likely to come in. The possibility of recording a song, the issue of a sound recording will come in, and then the question of how do we interface the cross relation of this right between the TK or the TCE vis-a-vis the right that has now been created because of the documentation process. Again, it's something that has been put out there in writing, but yet to be addressed. But as lawyers get into that space, they will also be able to investigate that and find practical and pragmatic ways. And one of them may be, that the person who's assisting in the documentation of the TK and TCE, if they don't want it to be a work for hire, for example, maybe they would get some sort of subsidized license to use the said work or something. But you can see that already is an opportunity that is very ripe. Again, the issue of just on a policy level, as far as TK and TC is concerned, a lot of opportunity for IP lawyers is ripe, even especially at an AU level. Right now, we're talking about the AFCFTA and looking at how we can create a single market. So already you can see on an IP level or perspective, there are a few issues that are yet to be addressed. So you find that there's a lot of opportunities in that regard. When we're talking about, again, now the issue of that cross-cutting interrelation with the different IP rights vis-a-vis TK and TCE, of course, now the conversation of expiration of rights would also come in. But of course, the ethos and the rationale behind TK and TCE is that the communities will continue to benefit time and time again. The challenge that I have seen is that there's been a lot of undertones that TK and TCEs are from the past, so they don't seem to have a dynamic approach in terms of the protection and the legislation of it. And I think that is something that we really need to look into. Again, at a continental level, I think we really need to investigate as different countries. Why are we not doing a better job at even just submitting to regional treaties and international instruments? Like, for example, the Stockholm Protocol on TK and TCEs is, I think has been domesticated by a handful, if not less, actually, maybe a few fingers. We're talking about South Africa, Kenya, and maybe one or two other African countries that have a TK legislation. So again, we need to be asking ourselves those questions and figuring out why is it we're not meeting at a certain level. And just looking at the West African region, for example, I imagine that there must be some similarities between most of your communities, from Nigeria across to Ghana. We've seen the Jollof Rice Wars, which we love to watch on Twitter. But like I imagine with exploring that documentation journey, a lot of that is likely to come into light. What else do I want to address? Yeah, I think that's all I can say in terms of TK and TCEs and the opportunities that are there. A commentary on geographical indications. Actually, before I go to the geographical indications, for us in Kenya, we have seen a few options where some communities tried to assert their community rights, either under the Trademark Act, using collective marks, but only insofar as identifying a certain community as packaged or created a certain product. But of course, more could be done because again, with this collective marks, you find that some of these groups tend to be exclusionary to other community members. So again, how do communities become more organized to ensure that everyone is benefiting from this economic gain from their TK and TCE? So which means again, at a community level, we need to find like more advanced structure and move from that, council of elders sort of approach or whatever it is that, the different communities may have, and now have a proper structure. Are you going to register a society or register a company limited by guarantee or something, and then have structures in terms of administering this right and making sure that all community members benefit. Now, fast forwarding now to the issue of geographical indications, I've been privy to a lot of conversations where, most of the people who are from, well, or rather more developed countries are always like, oh, Africa, you need to move away from GIs, you don't need GIs. I feel like they usually preach that narrative to just make us lose sight of what um, of the potential of GIs. In Kenya, we don't have a GI legislation. We've had a bill for the last 12 years that's been shelved. I think the last time it managed, perhaps, I think, to the first reading in Parliament, and then it was abandoned, never to be heard again 12 years later. So we're trying to figure out how to bring back that conversation and have a more updated GR bill and subsequently geographical indications law. But I think when you just assess as an IP lawyer, the successes that GIs have had in other communities, it has been really immense. Just looking at in the fashion sector, for example, we have seen a couple of countries protect the way they, their laces using geographical indications. We have seen the wine industry flourishing with GIs from the champagne and whatnot, and the whiskies in Scotland. Um, so there's a lot of opportunity, but why is it that as Africans we are not doing a better job? Again, just looking at South Africa, for example, and some of the potential litigious situations they were almost in, and I really applaud South Africans. They have achieved something that unfortunately Kenyans don't have, which is the ability to negotiate. We saw a few years back how a certain company in a foreign country tried to, what's the word, appropriate rooibos tea, and the South African government and their respective council were very creative in terms of how they negotiated that deal. It was a win-win, and now they make quite some good amount of economic benefit through the negotiations that they had with that particular company, and I think in this instance it was through the council of the tea growers, the rooibos tea, and something is going back into the economy. So again, I think if Nigeria doesn't have a GI law, I think it's important we have them. I think with that, again, it would be much easier to also appreciate the different, you know, communities and countries and the properties and assets that they have or possess. So that then we are also trading from a point of knowledge and not guesswork. I'm like, oh, I think this comes from Ghana. No, I think it comes from Cameroon. Like, there's a point of certainty. So yeah, like I said, I think geographical indication definitely would be important and something worth it. Point to ponder is, like, for us in Kenya, we have the plant breeder right, and we're seeing a lot of communities also involved in that process of creating new plant seed varieties. However, like for us, when you look at how the act is construed, the rights that a farmer would have or a community would have are sort of a little limited, because the ethos behind plant breeder rights was more food security. So that is another legislation that I think cuts across GIs and genetic resources, and figuring out how communities could benefit better. So in conclusion, I think there's a lot of opportunities in TK, TCEs, and genetic resources and GIs. So, just aside from thinking through litigation and appropriation, there's a lot of policy and legal conversations that can happen there that I think lawyers have an opportunity to. I really hope that my brief presentation has shed some light and shared some new information, and that it may inspire the mentees present. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lenjo. Thank you very much for that very educative and informative presentation on the topic. Thank you very much. It was very, very impactful and educative. So we have our mentees on the call, and we'll be calling on our mentees to make their PowerPoint presentation. As they're presenting, I think they'll also be sharing their slides. For our mentees, kindly note that you have 10 minutes each. We have 2 groups. So I'll call on group 1 to make their presentation, then group 2 can jump in afterwards. And after our presentations, we'll start taking in the questions for today. Already we have 3 questions for our 3 mentors, but we also entertain live questions. So for our mentees, the group 1 can start now.
Okay, let me share my slide. Okay, can everyone see my slide?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we can see it.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. From group 1, and we are talking on traditional knowledge and geographic indications. So normally, once you hear the word traditional or traditional knowledge or tradition, the first thing that comes to your mind is the way of living or the culture of a community per se. So traditional, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. So traditional knowledge and intellectual property is what we will be discussing. Traditional knowledge is the basic skill, the skills, and the development of a community or indigenous persons, and they come in different forms. Traditional comes in different forms, not particularly in one segment like that. So it could be in the stories we they tell, the songs. As Nigerians, we know that in different traditions has different songs we they sing just to tell a story or to tell about or to talk about a particular tradition. So we have that. We also have the. I'm sorry for that noise. We also have the folk tales, the stories we hear from our elders and all of that. Those are what we call the traditions, and the laws or the rules in which communities actually live by. Also, for traditional knowledge, there's also the agricultural aspect of it, and also the medical knowledge in which the traditional ways or traditional routes in which we use in healing people. That's what the traditional medical knowledge is about. Then when you're talking about traditional knowledge and intellectual property, we need to understand the reasons why they are actually important and why they need to be protected. Like for instance, when these traditional knowledge are protected, it preserves the cultural heritage. It also promotes fair benefit sharing. It also supports substantive development and combating by piracy, and also prevents misappropriation. And one of the things and the importance of protecting traditional knowledge is that it encourages documentation and preservation. Once we protect this traditional knowledge, they get the advantage of being, in a sense, written down or kept in a documented way or fashion that is being preserved, and it also encourages research. I mean, those documents that are preserved or those traditions that are being preserved, they are easy for people to, when they hear about it, can go back and research more about those particular traditional knowledge, if it is in the medical aspect or in the traditional or in the agricultural aspect, or even just to know about that tradition. And another thing is that in our slides, we made a note that it is important that we should make an effort to protect this traditional knowledge in IP, as it carries an active involvement and consent of the indigenous communities. And we move on to the next slide. That's the geographic indication and intellectual property law. When you talk about geographic indication, one thing about IP that I've come to learn thanks to this class is that IP is geographic in nature. I think it was during the third week that Mr. Marx said something on it, that IP is actually geographic in nature. Now, when you talk about traditions we all know is actually geographic in nature as well. So a community's tradition can differ from another community's tradition. And what they do is, what geographic indication means is that it's a sign that actually differentiates a product from one specific community to another, or the origin of that product coming out from one community or another. Take for instance, we have different type of, in Nigeria here, we have different type of garis. We have the white, the yellow, we have the groceries in total. And one of the garis that is actually popular is the Ijebu gari. That whenever you hear Ijebu gari, you always know that, yes, this gari is coming from the Ijebu land specifically. Then also geographic indication, it receives recognition and protection under IP law, particularly trademark. Can you still hear me? I think this thing has gone off.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, it's because I thought it had gone off. It just went off. Then we have protection of traditional knowledge. Like I said, it's important to protect traditional knowledge so as to encourage so many things, such as the research, the preservation, also the promoting cultural heritage. Yes, protection of traditional knowledge can be protected through by the Article 31 of the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, 2007. There's this customary and community law, which has been acknowledged the rights of indigenous people to protect their traditional knowledge. That means it has made a platform, or made a way whereby people, a community as a whole, can come and they can register their traditions, or they can make claim on a tradition that this is their tradition and it will be protected for them. Also, intellectual property, they can, for instance, specific provisions of the traditional knowledge protection may be incorporated into copyright, like maybe for the aspect of folktale, the aspect of song singing, or even the medical aspect of traditional laws. It can actually be incorporated into one of our IP rights protections. Then the sui generis system. We also have the defense protection and positive protection. Also, the protection of geographic indications can use trademark clause to actually protect the geographic indications. Also, the international agreements like TRIPS, and the regional protection. The regional protection is actually, I would say it's important because, like I earlier stated, traditions are actually geographic in nature, and when you register regionally or nationally, it actually protects that particular traditions. Some of the challenges that is being faced by traditional knowledge is that it is difficult to ascertain what it actually is, difficult to ascertain the intellectual property right, which it may be protected under. And also, there are a lot of people in a community that the collective ownership is also a challenge, because one person will say, no, I'm the one that did this, I'm the one that did this, or I'm the one that came up with the whole idea. You cannot say it is yours and all of that. That will also come up as a challenge. Then the issue of continuity. IP basically is protected for a limited time. It's protected for a limited time, especially in the aspect of patents and industrial design. Those are actually for a limited time. So that can also pose as a challenge for traditional knowledge. And also they could be exploited and also misappropriated. Then next slide is talking on international framework for protection of traditional knowledge and geographic indications. We've listed various platforms, various agreements on international organizations that actually protect or have made a way that we can protect the traditional knowledge and geographic indications, such as the TRIPS agreement, the WIPO, International Convention on Biological Diversity, the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation, and the Nagoya Protocol. Those are platforms or the frameworks that protect the that protects traditional knowledge and geographic indication internationally. In conclusion, traditional knowledge and geographic indications hold profound cultural and economic significance, because as humans, we cannot do without our traditional knowledge. We always fall back to it in one way or the other. This is reasons why we need to protect them, embodying the essence of intangible heritage and local identity. Their protection under intellectual property is essential to ensuring the preservation of traditional wisdom, practices, and distinctiveness associated with specific region. Thank you very much. And that is all for our presentation.
Thank you very much, Nisi, for that very good presentation on behalf of your group. The next group can go now before we take our questions for today.
I can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, let me share my screen.
The voice is echoing. I don't know if you are using two devices. Maybe you can stop it on one. Thank you.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay, so our topic is genetic resources and plant variety. So our content, we're going to define the key terms, and then we're going to talk about how intellectual property comes into play in genetic resources and plant variety. We're going to talk about challenges and solutions. So key terms: genetic resources are genetic materials in living hereditary information in a living organism. So, for example, the genetic material in your parents, in your mom or your dad, that's now in you as a child, is the reason why your mom has brown eyes and you also have brown eyes. So for plant variety are unique kinds of plants. They have desirable traits. For example, they are able to survive in harsh environmental conditions, and plant varieties are a result of the special breeding techniques of which genetic materials are a foundation of. So how does IP come into play in all of these? So like we all know, like we've been taught weeks, IP protects innovation, protects inventions, and all of that. Plant varieties are, like I said, are unique plants. They have desirable traits. They come as a result of a special breeding. Somebody has intact these things because they are.
We can't hear our presenter. Can anyone hear you? Hear the person presenting, please. I think the person is having network issues. I don't know if you have a backup presenter for group 2.
Sorry about the network issue. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I was saying IP protects innovations, and plant varieties are innovations because they are special plants that someone has innovated and through a special breeding technique. So the first way IP protects is through plant breeders' rights. So plant breeders' rights are those exclusive rights that are conferred on the breeders, people that come up with these special breeding techniques, and which produce laws on PBRs. The laws are the international law is the International Convention for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants, and then the one that applies in Nigeria, which is very recent, is the Plant Varieties Protection Act of 2021. So before this Plant Varieties Protection Act was signed by the former president, there was no law that used to cater to PBRs in Nigeria because Nigeria is not part of the UPOV. But now we have a law. So the requirements for the protection of PBRs, we have it must be new, it must be distinct, it must be uniform, and it must be stable. And you can find them in section 13 of Nigerian plant variety system. The second way IP protects plant varieties, we have patents, like we all, and in fact, patents are they produce better protection for this plant variety with these seeds. The propagating breeders have exclusive rights to those seeds to sell those, both the special breeding techniques and the plant itself, which includes the seeds. So patents produce a stronger protection for these things. So now, what are the challenges faced in protection? So for every, we all know that where there's a good thing, there's always a sort of disadvantage. So disadvantage here is that there's the problem of conservation and the problem of access, benefit sharing, and all of that. So for example, to just make it simple to grab, there are plants that are rare and they can be found in just like specific places. So plants like that, those communities where they can only be found, they might have an issue with you taking the seeds from the main issue. If we listed out 4 challenges, and basically that's the main thing we're trying to say in the first 2. And for we also have the problem of farmers' rights. So farmers' rights, usually farmers have the right to sell seeds of plants, to do whatever they want to do with seeds because they are farmers. But if you now protect specific plants and you give somebody exclusive rights to them, it can kind of limit farmers' rights, which is a problem. So how do we now strike a balance? So there should be a kind of benefit sharing at local communities where those plants are found, and whoever wants to come and use those plants. So you should take permission. In the last slide before this one, the 12th slide, we wrote something called biopiracy, which is when you don't have the right or you don't have the permission, and then you come and use a community's, their plants or something like that without their permission. So to avoid things like that, there should be a benefit sharing agreement. So, like, for example, if I want to come to, let's say, Ogun State, somewhere in Ogun State, and I want to use a plant that I can only find in Ogun State, I want to take their seed to do an experiment and bring up a special breeding technique and then a plant variety. The government or the people in that local community, I should be able to come into an agreement with them, maybe to give them a certain percentage of whatever I get from my innovation. So that way they are getting something, I'm getting something, and I'm not exploiting them. And also the farmers' rights should also be protected, because farmers, obviously, they are the main contributors to the agricultural sector. So their rights should not be limited because we are trying to protect unique plants. So in conclusion, IP plays a vital role in agriculture because there's innovation in agriculture and IP comes in to protect it. But in the same way, there are still, like I said, there are still some disadvantages. And so there's a need to strike a balance between the need to protect innovation and the need for conservation of the plants that people want to get seeds from. So that's our presentation on this topic. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Tobechukwu, for that presentation on behalf of your group. Thank you very much, also Group 1. We'll be taking questions now from our both mentors. I would call on Mr. Professor Rama to give us any comments he has on the presentation before we take our questions. Professor Rama, yes.
Hi, thank you. I have no questions. I'm really thrilled and excited at the presentations, both the Group 1 by Nisi Vinay and Group 2 by Tobechukwu Yuzo Nokori. I think both the presentations are excellent. And if only I heard the Group 1 presentation in advance, I don't think I would have made my presentation at all, because that's so close to what I said. And I really appreciate it in terms of the whole scheme about, anyway, I don't want to get into that. I really think it was excellent in terms of biopiracy to sustainable development to whatever it is now in terms of TK. And on the second presentation on the genetic resources, plant varieties, breeders' rights, and and then Group 1, she also referred to, I think, Article 31 of UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I was involved in that in 2007 from the WIPO side. I was there in the establishment of the UN Indigenous Peoples Organization since Kofi Annan's time. So, and the breeders' right, UPOV, then Food and Agriculture Organizations. UPOV is a sister organization of WIPO. And then the FAO plant varieties. So both of them are excellent. I only compliment. I have no questions. I really appreciate them both. And best wishes to both the groups and both the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rama, for that little input. And we'll be asking a question to you after we get the input from our other mentors. I don't know if we have Mr. Sand on the call. Yes, Mr. Sand, any contribution, any correction to the board
Okay,
presentation?
yeah, so can everybody hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I also want to commend the first group. I kind of like their PPT presentation. I think this is the best and finest PPT slide I've ever seen in this stuff. I think whoever put the PPT together did a good job. But my only suggestion is kind of not really correcting, but just to also just make us be aware of it. So traditional knowledge, geographical indication is geographical. So that it should be AL after the geographic. Geographical AL. So PTAL. So it finishes it. And now, under the TRIPS agreement, I don't know why they made it in the TRIPS agreement, they call it geographical indications. And some people still call it geographical indications. So maybe just next time complete it. And my comment is that I'm still on group 1. Plant variety, I mean, a traditional knowledge and plant and geographical indication. Relationship very close. There are some areas of geographical indication that are in traditional knowledge. However, when you say the law, Nigerian law currently protects geographical indication, not totally in totality, as I've mentioned in my opening remark, that collective mark covers an aspect. Geographical indication has to do with smell, flavor, color, all manner of characteristics. So in one of your slides, I think it's slide, let me see, where you mention sui generic system in passing. I think why we know geographical indication is local, which you've also mentioned, but sui generic system cures both the challenge with traditional knowledge, because and as well as GIs. So I would have appreciated you dwell more on why sui generis system is important, and as well as even CBD. Even the last administration passing currently passed even plant variety and traditional knowledge part of it under copyright, as I mentioned earlier. It does not still dwell more on ensuring that TK, as far as Nigeria is concerned, is protected. And I would have also appreciated us also dwelling more on the fragmented part of our intellectual property system, where Ministry of Justice is handling copyright, plant variety is with Seed Council, trademark, patent and design is industry. So maybe in the subsequent presentation, just dwell more on that. But outside that, fantastic presentation, articulating your point was straightforward. It was simple to understand. So presenter 2, even though I didn't have access to your presentation, also did a good job. I think even giving that example, it made it simple that why would someone give birth to a child and has brown eyes and the child have brown eyes, because of the genetic connection and variety that comes with it. And as well as the example of the challenge of collective sharing, who shares what, who takes what, the exploitation. I think you did a good job. The network did not allow me to really go through what you presented live and line, but above all, well done, fantastic. You guys will keep the work and the efforts going. So I'll allow the other mentor to make his own, her own intervention. And then I will then look forward to questions and see how we can address it. Thank you. You are muted. Moderator, you are muted.
I'm sorry, sir. I was thanking you for the input and the contribution. Yeah, it's true. We didn't get the group two's presentation earlier. That's why it was not sent to our mentors. We just only got it ready today. I'm giving the floor to Ms. Liz Lenjo to also give us her input before we take our questions for today.
Thank you so much. My input will be brief because much has already been said. Mine will just be to remind mentees to also find opportunities to relate with examples that are already there, even in other countries, and make reference to them and demonstrate, and also just, be able to make comparisons, because at the end of the day, when you're applying most of these, either legal principles or ideologies, it also means that you're learning from other jurisdictions and other already existing examples, and you're able to interact and identify the opportunities or the successes, just to demonstrate that interaction and knowledge. But otherwise, I think the both groups at least did a good job. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liz Lenjo. I'll be taking in the questions now. While I'm taking the questions, I encourage our mentees to share their questions also on the chat box. You can either share your question or you raise your hand while I call on you to ask your question. But before the question and answer, I just texted the question and answer on the chat box. So I encourage everyone to turn on their videos wherever you are. For just 30 seconds, I'm taking some screenshots of our session today so that we can attach it to our posts when we are sharing it on our social media handles. Kindly just turn on your videos, smile for the camera for 30 seconds. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, I've taken few screenshots. Thank you. For those that haven't turned their videos, you can kindly turn your video on before we go. Okay, thank you very much. So the first question is for Mr. Professor Rama Rao, which is on the chat box already, but I'm going to read it out loud. Who enjoys the economic right of a traditional knowledge?
Okay. Now, there are two views on that, or both of them could be right or could be wrong. Number one is under this, to the extent it refers to CBD, biodiversity, TK, genetic resources, it's the sovereign right of each country. And particularly that is what the developing countries also would want. Number two, the traditional knowledge holders have the right to traditional knowledge. That's what Article 31, which has been cited in Group 1's presentation of UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, speaks about that the traditional knowledge holders, which is the indigenous peoples and the local communities, have rights over their traditional knowledge. And they can go together. Yeah, both of them can have the rights. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Rama, for the answer to that question. The next question is for Ms. Liz Lenjo. How is the challenge of expiration, duration of intellectual property rights? how can it be resolved?
Wow. I think that's such a broad question because of the different IP rights and their different, should I say, span of life, quote unquote, for lack of a better term. But in terms of the term, so of course, depending on which IP right that is in question, the person has to interrogate based on the act. Some countries have different approaches. Like for us, photography has been accorded the same treatment as sound recordings, that it is protected from the day it was made available or from the last day of the year in which it was published for 50 years. So instead of for the lifetime of the author plus 50. So it will really depend on the interrogation of the subject matter. I think when you look at the terms, they're generally clear and almost universally acceptable. If it's copyright, if it's trademark, just a bit of variances and nuances in terms of maybe a little bit of more years, like in the US, copyright is plus 75 years after death, for example. So being able to understand that. Of course, we've seen interesting strategies in the patent space, and how especially the pharmaceuticals will always try to, expand the lives of their patents. When I give an example of like SmithKline and the Panadol range of painkillers, we've seen Panadol Extra, Panadol something. Like, people try to just be clever. Yeah, of course, most of it is frowned upon, but you can see where some of their minds is at in terms of economic rights. Of course, for TK and TCEs, the issue of documentation will bring about, that cross-cutting issue of rights. And we've seen some proponents or even some writers claiming that the minute a TK would be recorded, then it would be appended to the lifetime of the medium it was used. And some are like, what is a medium? So it will be interesting to see the more communities that are documenting their TKs and TCEs, how that would pan out. But of course, for those who are here present, is being cognizant of the fact or of the knowledge of what IP rights last for what period, and then investigating that interaction maybe with the TK and TCEs. I think, when you're talking about genetic resources, plant breeder rights, it's pretty straightforward, but perhaps maybe communities could, benefit more depending on how a legislation is crafted. I imagine yours being a law of 2021 would be more robust than ours, which was drafted in I think the early 90s, mid 90s, early 2000s. So I think there would be room for improvement there, in terms of, at least in my opinion, in terms of interactions. But I think it's mostly about just interacting with the basic principles, and then you build up from there, because IP has been very dynamic as we are seeing it. Even now conversations about AI, and AI will affect most, if not some, of all of these IPRs we're talking about. If we end up using AI, for example, to document TK and TCEs, that's a whole other conversation, So I think, like I said, in terms of interacting with the basic principles would be really important. Then you're able to have more pragmatic and well-informed approach when it comes to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liz Lenjo. We'll be taking the last question for Mr. Sand. I don't think he's still on the call. I think we've lost Mr. Sand. I kept this last question for Mr. Sand because I was hoping he would address it from the Nigerian perspective. But either of our mentor can go. Are there any specific laws in Nigeria protecting traditional knowledge and generic resources? Professor Rama, I don't know if you can help us with the answer to that, but I was actually hoping that Mr. Sand will stay with us for the questions.
Well, I wouldn't know much about it, but I think Mr. Sang had said before he left in his last presentation, as well as I think, including also the group 1 and group 2 slides also mentioned that in Nigeria, the first one is, of course, protected. The second one, of course, not so sure. But I think he said, yes, it's protected in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would give Mr. Sand the floor to also elaborate on that answer. Mr. Sand, the question is, are there specific laws in Nigeria protecting traditional knowledge and geographical indications?
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I went off because of network. Yeah, there are no specific law protecting TK or GI in Nigeria. The provisions there
Can anyone hear Mr. Sand?
I believe we lost him.
Yeah, it's the network glitch. I also urge our mentees to ask questions, engage with our mentors while they are still on the call before we'll be ending the call for today. If you have any question with regards to the topic for today, kindly raise your hand so that I'll call on you, or just unmute yourself and ask your question now. Okay, I believe there's no more question for today. We can end the session for today. Thank you once again. Thank you so much for making out time to join us today, Professor Rama Rao. Mrs. Lenjo, thank you very much for joining us today. I will give the floor to Professor Rama to just give us his final comments before we leave.
In one sentence, I would say to all the colleagues that make the presentations and you as the convener and the mentees, that we are today in the field of traditional knowledge, genetic resources, IP, as well as TCEs, at a very critical juncture, a very critical point, which is the diplomatic conference, which is supposed to draw, which may draw a legal instrument or legal instruments globally to govern the subjects that we are covering today. A diplomatic conference is something that does not happen in the United Nations or in WIPO or in the United Nations system every day. As far as this is concerned, in WIPO, it is a culmination of the process starting from 1967 to 2023 now, or specifically from the IGC from 2000 to 2023 now. It's a long process involving 192 countries. And in this context, the indigenous communities and their non-governmental organizations, NGOs and civil society from all over the world. This is a very critical moment, and the preparatory committee is meeting in exactly a month from today. And then the dates of the conference and the venue is not yet completely fixed. People have been talking about between South Africa and India. We don't know what's going to happen. But whatever it is, what the group 1 has said about the defensive protection, the positive protection, the traditional knowledge in the traditional sense, the traditional knowledge in the innovative sense, the ending of biopiracy, the ending of the doctrine of public domain, these are all critical jurisprudential issues, including the sui generis on one hand versus the contractual approach or the common spaces approach. These are all big issues practically and theoretically, jurisprudentially in intellectual property. And that is the moment that we are in. And let's hope, as we are all now the students or the practitioners or the lawyers or the attorneys, advocates of intellectual property, let's hope for the best. When exactly the convention is going to happen, we don't know. It is supposed to meet in 2024. And right now, the current biennium of the Intergovernmental Committee will end in 23. 24, 25, WIPO General Assembly will meet again to schedule the work for the next 2 years. And how long will this work go on? We don't know. What form of this? Would there be a convention? Would there be a treaty? Would there be a declaration? Would there be a resolution? Would there be a statement? These are all different forms of legal instruments. That is not also yet defined. Essentially, this is going to speak about the disclosure. I'm emphasizing this, and this is the substantive point, the disclosure of origin of the genetic resources and the source of such genetic resources. That is, which is related to traditional knowledge and intellectual property, is the fundamental question. And the second part of it is, as I said, the database, making of database, then the dispute settlement, and then the categorization of stopping the misappropriation and the erroneous patenting of traditional knowledge on one hand, and on the other hand, promoting innovative, proactive intellectual property for traditional knowledge in developing countries and as owned by the traditional communities and the indigenous peoples. I will stop here. Thank you. This is a very critical juncture that we are in, and this is an important topic. I just want one more sentence to say, geographical indications was originally called appellations of origin. I did not put that in my statement, but I was not addressing geographical indications. But during the Uruguay round, when the French came out with their wines and spirits for the geographical indication, and the Italians came for the cheese, that's when the Indians and the Pakistanis came for basmati. But otherwise, this was called the appellations of origin, and that was in the trademark field before. It was not necessarily associated with traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions initially, but now that is coming in. But this focus is now on this. On one hand, we have diplomatic conference for the traditional knowledge, and on the other hand, we have the Assembly and the IGC, Intergovernmental Committee on TK and TCEs, focusing on both the items comprehensively. These are the two areas. One is specific for TK, the other is for generic for TK and TCEs. There are two legal drafts that are going on, and they are proposed in the individual capacity by the chairman. Thank you, my friend. I'm done.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Rama. It's always a pleasure to have you on the call and listen to a very, very vast experience of knowledge regarding the topic. Thank you once again, Mrs. Leslenjo, for joining us today. Our last mentor is no more on the call. Thank you very much, everyone, the group members and the team leaders and presenters. Thank you very much, everyone, and have an amazing weekend ahead. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you and goodbye, everyone.